In the autumn of 1940, the Erika made its entry at the Hendaye station, located in Labour, a territory of the French Basque country, right on the border that separates Spain from France. On board was Adolf Hitler, awake and visibly restless. Francisco Franco, leader of Spain, must have been waiting for him at the station. However, the convoy in which the Spanish dictator and his collaborators were traveling arrived 8 minutes late, apparently due to the terrible state of the railway lines which had been raised during the Spanish Civil War. When Franco got off the carriage in which he was traveling together with Ramon Serrano Suñer, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hitler and Joachim von Ribbentrop, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nazi Germany, were waiting for him anxiously at the edge of the stairs. After the obligatory introductions carried out by the German ambassador to Spain, Baron Eberhard von Storer, both leaders proceeded to greet the troops that were neatly formed along the platform. The meeting took place in Hitler's wagon and was not attended by the Spanish ambassador to Germany, Eugenio Espinosa de los Monteros, or the German ambassador. In the dark and old carriage there were only Franco, Hitler, von Ribbentrop, Serrano Suñer, and 2 interpreters. The purpose of the meeting was well known to all. Hitler intended to swell the ranks of the Wehrmacht with Spanish troops to defeat the Allied forces in Gibraltar, then send them to North Africa to expel the British from Libya and thus facilitate the occupation of Egypt. Franco, for his part, had received some pressure before the meeting from his ministers, who advised him to ally himself with what they believed would undoubtedly be the winning power of the war. Such an alliance, they claimed, could bring Spain great compensation, both economic and territorial. The Spanish dictator was not, however, so sure of that. After all, the brutal German offensive on Poland, with which Hitler had started World War II, had taken place only 6 months after the end of the Spanish Civil War. Franco ruled, after 3 long years of conflict, a nation in ruins. After assuming command, the Spanish general had to face a difficult decision. He could collaborate with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, which had helped him win the war, support the Allies, or cling to neutrality, the same position that Spain had adopted during the First World War. Franco, obstinate and serene, decided to ignore the opinion of his ministers and withdraw into neutrality. His opinion was that the country was not economically or militarily prepared to enter the war. Hitler was cunning. He knew that trying to impose himself on Franco was not the best option, so he decided to persuade him. He spoke again and again of the strength of the Spanish troops and the enormous benefits that their help would bring to the country and the continent. The Spanish general was not seduced and decided to ask for something in exchange for his entry into the conflict. The price set was, however, too high. Franco demanded the return of Gibraltar after the defeat of the United Kingdom, the cession of French Morocco and part of French Algeria to Spain, and the surrender of French Cameroon, which would join the Spanish colony of Guinea, in addition to the sending of enormous quantities of supplies to alleviate the economic and military situation that Spain was suffering. Hitler was unwilling to give in to Franco's demands and pointed out that he could not negotiate the surrender of any territory until he met with General Pétain, leader of Vichy France, the next day. Franco, unperturbed, said that he understood perfectly and that he had no intention of doing anything that could harm the meeting of the Führer with the French general. The meeting, which had been going on for more than 7 hours until then, came to an impasse. Franco adopted a collaborative attitude while refusing to allow the German army to establish its bases on Spanish territory, which would have facilitated access to Gibraltar, controlled by British forces. For the Spanish general, that was, after all, the most logical thing to do, since Germany could not consider any of his demands. Franco knew that his demands were impossible to meet, and it was Hitler himself who gave him the arguments he needed not to commit himself at that time to his entry into the conflict. Once the meeting was over, Serrano Suñer met privately with von Ribbentrop, and between them they decided to draw up a secret protocol in which Franco promised to enter the war on a date that he himself would determine, and in which Hitler made a vague promise about Gibraltar. 3 copies of the protocol arrived secretly in Madrid on November 9th and were signed by Serrano Suñer. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "The Führer does not have a good opinion of Spain and Franco. Much ado about nothing, nothing solid. In any case, they are not at all prepared for war. They are hidalgos of an empire that no longer exists." In the end, the agreement between the two never came to fruition, and Spain never participated in the Second World War. The truth is that the position of Franco and his government changed over time, unfailingly tied to the course of the war, although he always maintained an ambiguous neutrality that was, in short, beneficial to his interests. When everything seemed to indicate that the Third Reich would defeat Great Britain, Franco created a recruitment center for volunteers who wanted to join the ranks of the German army, allowed German submarines to refuel in Spanish ports, censored any news that reported German defeats, and gave Abwehr agents freedom of movement throughout Spanish territory while they carried out surveillance work. However, the most obvious movement of support for the Axis forces occurred in June 1941, when Serrano Suñer, faced with internal pressures, promoted the sending of a division of Spanish volunteers in support of Germany during the invasion of the Soviet Union, the famous Blue Division. Franco's shadow in the East, the tragic history of the Blue Division. Created in the spring of 1941, the Blue Division was made up mostly of phalangists, veteran soldiers of the Spanish Civil War, and young people influenced by François or anti-Soviet ideals who wanted to fight against communism. The initiative was very well received by supporters of the national side and members of the Phalange, who blamed the Soviet Union for being the instigator and responsible for all the events that led to the Civil War. Although the Nazi regime required that the contingent be made up entirely of experienced soldiers, it was finally agreed that the soldiers would be volunteers under the command of professional officers of the Spanish army. The government deployed a huge propaganda device and managed to recruit approximately 18,000 people. Some of them were unofficially made up of criminals who were offered the possibility of enlisting as a way to serve their sentence. Others did so to clear their records or those of their family, since they had belonged to groups opposed to the Franco regime in the past. And there were even some Russian emigrants, veterans of the Civil War, among the recruits. The Blue Division was sent to the Eastern Front in a convoy that ascended the Atlantic coast through Bordeaux and Poitiers, where it was stoned by the local population, and then headed east through the Loire Valley. The units were formed at the end of July 1942, when the basic instruction of trench formation, advance by squads, and defense with mortars and machine guns began. A week later, the oath to the Führer took place. After the oath, broadcast live on German radio, the Wehrmacht's 250th Infantry Division was officially constituted. Once in the enemy camp, the Blue Division fought in several battles, mainly in the Leningrad region, which was under siege, and in the historic city of Novgorod. Conditions at the front were extremely harsh, with severe weather, lack of supplies, and constant and intense clashes with Soviet forces. Despite the initial success in recruitment, the prolongation of the war and the news coming from the Soviet Union made it difficult to attract replacements in the following months. In mid-October, the stubborn resistance of the Soviet army made it clear that the confrontation was going to last longer than planned. Although Germany achieved an important victory in Novgorod after an intense confrontation on the western flank of the Volkhov River in January 1943, the Red Army launched Operation Spark, with the aim of breaking through the German lines and lifting the encirclement surrounding the Leningrad region. The operation ended on January 30th with the Soviet victory, which managed to break the siege and open a supply line to the city. Just 2 weeks later, Operation Polar Star began, which aimed to completely defeat the German army, liberate the region, and create the prerequisites for a successful offensive in the Baltic states. In this context, the famous Battle of Krasny Bor took place in the outskirts of Leningrad, where the Blue Division reported more than 3,000 dead or wounded and a similar number of missing or prisoners. However, none of the objectives set by Stalin were met, as the Soviet army failed to break through the German lines or open the road. Over the next 6 months, the front stabilized. The climate, however, did not change. The region was still populated by patrols, trenches, snipers, artillery attacks, and various containment actions that continued to produce casualties. The confrontation had dragged on too long. The fate of the war was uncertain, and news of a possible withdrawal from the Eastern Front began to spread among the ranks of Spanish soldiers. While the siege was maintained, the division's headquarters, accompanied by General Georg Lindemann, decided to celebrate the anniversary of the coup d'état of 1936 in July. In the midst of the celebration, the Spaniards were surprised, however, by the firestorm of the Allied bombardments. Finally, due to heavy losses and Allied pressure on the Franco regime, the Blue Division was withdrawn. Negotiations with the Allies, which began at the end of 1943, concluded with the staggered repatriation order on October 10th. However, between 1,500 and 2,000 Spanish soldiers refused the order to return to Spain. Some joined other German units, mainly the Waffen-SS, and others crossed the Spanish border at Lourdes in southern France. These new units were collectively referred to as the Blue Legion and continued to fight until 1944. However, after Soviet troops lifted the siege of Leningrad, forcing the Germans to retreat to the Baltic countries, members of the Legion were moved by rail to the rear. Although some Spaniards were regrouped into other German combat units, most had already been repatriated. The participation of the Blue Division in World War II is currently a controversial issue in the history of Spain. For some, the volunteers were heroes who fought against communism, while for others their participation constitutes a stain on Spanish history due to their collaboration with the Nazi regime. The truth is that the Blue Division allowed Franco to show his support for Hitler without totally compromising Spanish neutrality. It is perhaps the best example of how François sought to balance its ideology and its national interests in an extremely conflictive global context. From Berlin to Madrid, the hidden journey of the Nazis in Spain. After the fall of the Third Reich, while huge groups of soldiers surrendered to the Allied forces or secretly bit cyanide capsules, overcome by the image of horror they had invoked on the world and drowning in the sweet smell of almonds that this poison gives off, many Nazi generals decided to escape Germany. Ratlines, a term that, although appropriate to imagine the flight of thousands of fugitives from justice, has a nautical origin. It refers to the ropes tied between shrouds to form a ladder. The last resort sailors had to avoid drowning if their ship sank, were escape systems designed for this purpose. Itineraries designed to cross different European countries with a single objective: reach a port and escape by boat to some safe paradise in South America. The three most commonly used ratlines were the Nordic route, which passed through Denmark on its way to Sweden, the Vatican route or route of the monasteries, which, crossing the Alps, included stops at monasteries in South Tyrol, Merano and Bolzano until it reached Rome or Genoa, and was where the vast majority of the fugitives passed since Italy had been Germany's main ally during the war, and the Iberian route, which was coordinated by Nazi collaborators who lived in Spain with the approval of General Franco. The ratlines were crucial for the escape of such important figures as Ante Pavelic, Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele. Many people believe that the ratlines were coordinated by a huge secret organization called Odessa, Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen. This theory was largely popularized by the writer Frederick Forsyth in his novel The Odessa File from 1972. In the novel, Forsyth describes Odessa as a secret organization dedicated to helping former SS members escape Europe and establish new lives in Latin America and other parts of the world. This novel, although fictional, contributed significantly to the fame of the term. However, the existence of Odessa as a centralized and highly coordinated organization has been questioned, mainly due to the fact that no conclusive documentary evidence has been found to prove the existence of an organizational structure bearing that name. However, it is indisputable that there were networks and support groups that helped the Nazis escape justice. Although the existence of Odessa as a centralized organization of global reach is doubtful, the escape activities of Nazis through various networks are a proven fact. Many even claim that the ratlines were not only coordinated by the Nazis, but also by the intelligence forces of the United States and the United Kingdom, who helped their informants and dozens of German scientists, engineers and technicians escape to collaborate with them in their fight against the Soviet Union in the emerging context of the Cold War. Under the Franco regime, Spain quickly became a haven for many members of the Nazi Party. Franco, who had maintained a close relationship with the Axis powers during the war, though officially neutral, allowed a number of Nazis to take refuge in the country. Although there is no conclusive evidence that the Franco regime actively organized escape routes, it is known that the Spanish authorities were complicit in allowing these criminals to stay in the country or use it as a transit point. They were often provided with false documentation and in some cases offered protection. Spain was an important transit station on these escape routes. The Nazis arrived in Spain from Germany, Austria, and other European countries through the Pyrenees, the mountain range that separates France from Spain, and from there continued their journey to Latin America, especially to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, where they established themselves with new identities. In other cases, these fugitives remained on the peninsula. The city of Madrid was especially used as a refuge for different war criminals, while fascism fell in Europe and the Franco dictatorship was maintained in Spain. Madrid quickly became one of the key points of the networks woven throughout the European continent by the fascists. Dozens of Germans, Italians, Austrians, and Croatians found in the Spanish capital a safe place and a suitable space to meet, share ideas, publish, organize events, and rethink their strategies. The person responsible for the first rat line organized in Madrid was Arturo degli Agostini, owner of an ice cream parlor in the center of the city, and identified by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of his country as one of the most active fascists in the Italian community in Madrid. After the fall of fascism, Agostini developed a double activity. On the one hand, he reorganized the Italian colony of the city, near the Italian school in Chambéry, and created businesses orbiting around the Italian Chamber of Commerce. On the other, he consolidated an escape network thanks to his contacts with the Spanish government. One of the main figures who settled in Madrid was Mario Roata, former head of Mussolini's secret services, who was appointed director of the Spanish-Italian Commercial Society. Johannes Bernhardt, general director of the Sofindus Holding Company, which had supervised the economic relations of Hitler's government with the Franco-led rebels since 1936, was responsible for organizing the second escape route. Bernhardt was close to several Nazi Party champions and was a key player in Operation Safe Haven, designed by the Anglo-American powers to try to recruit German assets based in neutral countries. From his office on Gran Via, or from a table in the Pasapoga nightclub, Bernhardt, a double agent, designed another escape route used by the Nazis in the mid-1945s. Finally, thanks to this, Bernhardt obtained the rank of General of the SS on an honorary basis. Carlos Fuldner, an Argentine businessman and spy of German origin who had fought on the Russian front with the Blue Division, created the third escape route. It included bishops of European fascism, the media director of Belgian Rexism, the leader of the Flemish SS, who led an action against the Jews of Antwerp, the Romanian ambassador to Spain, or a journalist from the reactionary French magazine Je suis partout. All of them developed for years a frenetic activity in favor of rat lines, falsification of documents, bribes, links, trips, before settling in Buenos Aires, where they continued to provide residence permits to war criminals. Spiritual escapades. The role of the Catholic Church in the Nazis' escape routes. The Catholic Church played, on the other hand, a highly controversial role in the deployment of these escape routes. Some members of the Church, particularly clergy with sympathies for fascism, were involved in organizing escape routes. In Italy, the Vatican's charity and the action of certain priests facilitated the transit of Nazi fugitives to non-European countries, providing them with false documentation or logistical assistance. To escape to South America via Italy, most of Nazi Germany's criminals crossed the Alps to South Tyrol, where they were given refuge in the monastery of the Teutonic Order in Merano, in the Capuchin monastery near Bressanone, or in the Franciscan monastery of Bolzano. From there they continued to Rome, where, with an identity card from the Catholic Church that certified a new identity, they obtained the passport of the Red Cross. It is estimated that the International Committee of the Red Cross issued some 120,000 such documents between 1945 and 1951. With these papers, the criminals boarded the ships and escaped to South America. The first Catholic priest to set about creating escape routes was Alois Rudell, rector of the Pontifical Teutonic Institute Santa Maria dell'Anima in Rome, a seminary for priests from Austria and Germany. After the end of the war in Italy, Rudell became an active advocate for German-speaking prisoners of war and internees who were scattered throughout Italy. Rudell used this position to help wanted Nazi war criminals escape, including Franz Stangl, commandant of Treblinka, Gustav Wagner, commander of Sobibor Alois Brunner, head of the Drancy internment camp near Paris, and officer in charge of deportations from Slovakia to German concentration camps, and Adolf Eichmann. However, according to declassified intelligence reports from the US government, Rudell was not the only priest who helped the Nazis escape. In the La Vista report, declassified in 1984, Counterintelligence Corps agent Vincent La Vista reported how he had easily managed to obtain false ICRC documents for 2 alleged Hungarian refugees, thanks to a letter from the Catholic priest Joseph Gallov, administrator of a Vatican charity association for Hungarian refugees. Another priest who became famous for organizing ratlines from Rome was the Bosnian Croat Krunoslav Draganovic, who helped the leaders of the Croatian nationalist organization Ustaša, an ally of Nazism, to escape. Some also point to the role of Argentine Cardinal Antonio Caggiano, who apparently met in 1946 at the Vatican with his French counterpart Eugène Tisserand, with the aim of informing him that Argentina was willing to receive the French who had collaborated with Nazism. On the other hand, there are still doubts about the degree of participation of Pope Pius XII, who had taken office a few months before the war broke out in the route of the monasteries. According to historian Hubert Wolff, Pacelli feared the advance of communism, which he considered the greatest threat to the Catholic Church, and for that reason he would have lent himself to facilitate the escape of the Nazis. While in 1998 the Vatican publicly apologized for its inaction during the Nazi regime, it has so far always defended the role of Pius XII. However, the current Pope Francis, of Argentine origin, authorized in 2020 that all the archives of the mandate of Pius XII be opened. Wolff said that while it could take years, it will finally be known whether the Holy Pontiff gave direct instructions to help Nazi fugitives escape in order to combat the communist danger, or whether he was completely unaware of the situation. Otto Skorzeny in Spain, the latest adventure of the most dangerous man in Europe. Pierre Day was a Belgian journalist, soldier and Nazi collaborator who became a naturalized Argentine. A volunteer during the First World War, he fought in his country and on the African continent, collaborated with the far-right newspapers Le Soir, Je suis partout and Le Nouveau, and was part of the Belgian House of Representatives as a member of the Rexist movement, a Catholic, nationalist, authoritarian and corporatist political party active from 1935 to 1945, and founded by the journalist Léon Degel. In the pages of his diary, it can be seen how at the end of the 1940s representatives of the extreme right from all over Europe regrouped in Madrid. We felt that nothing was over, that unforeseen events would arise that would put everything back at stake, that our cause was just, and that revenge would come one day. If they had little money, they met in taverns on Lope de Vega Street where they dined while listening to flamenco. If they were wealthier, they met at the Horcha restaurant on Alfonso XII Street. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the process of denazification, to which the Allied forces had been intensely engaged in the immediate aftermath of the war, began to be displaced by the Cold War. Former members of the Nazi Party and other fascist movements were able to begin to act more freely in countries such as Spain. Most of them settled in Madrid, where they resumed their political activity, equipping themselves with new transnational platforms and reworking their doctrine. The CIA was perfectly aware, for example, that a prominent member of the SS, like Otto Skorzeny, had an office as an engineer on the Gran Via from which he carried out commercial and financial operations, and at the same time that the office served as a cover for a political activity in which de Grelle himself was involved. Born in Austria in 1988 to a nationalist family of Viennese origin, Skorzeny joined the Nazi Party in the early 1930s. He was a member of the Waffen-SS 150th Grenadier Division and became one of the most prominent leaders of the Nazi Special Forces. An expert in espionage and sabotage, he was nicknamed Scarface by the Americans because of the schmiss he obtained during a fencing duel in his youth, when he was a member of a Burschenschaft at a university in Vienna, and which he wore proudly throughout his life. In the summer of 1943, Skorzeny was appointed by Hitler to charge the rescue operation for Benito Mussolini. By the middle of that year, after Allied forces invaded Italy, Mussolini had been deposed and arrested by the new Italian government, which sought to negotiate with the Allies. The Italian dictator was being held at the Grand Sasso Hotel in the Italian Alps under strict surveillance. Skorzeny led Operation Eicher, which aimed to free Mussolini and reinstate him as the leader of a new fascist government in northern Italy. The operation was carried out on the night of September 12th to 13th, 1943. Skorzény's team, consisting of 120 Waffen-SS paratroopers and elite soldiers, was transported in gliders from Germany to a runway near the Gran Sasso. Once there, the German commandos descended by parachute, took control of the hotel and freed Mussolini, who was taken back to Germany and then to northern Italy, where he was to lead the state of the Italian Social Republic, installed under the notorious influence of Hitler. Operation Eicher was a strategic and propaganda success for the Nazis, demonstrating the ability of special forces and Skorzény's determination. However, its actual impact on the course of the war was limited, as Mussolini's control over Italy was short-lived, and his influence failed to significantly change the balance of power in the region. Skorzeny was also a key figure in the deployment of Operation Panzerfaust. In October 1944, Miklos Horthy, regent of Hungary, a country occupied by the forces of the Nazi regime, attempted to negotiate a separate peace with the Allies. Horthy sought to get out of the conflict and ensure Hungary's neutrality, but his move was seen as a betrayal by Hitler, who designed the operation with the aim of capturing him. The plan was carried out on October 15, 1944. German stormtroopers, along with units of the Waffen-SS, carried out a quick and decisive raid on Budapest, quickly captured Horthy, and installed Ferenc Szalasi, leader of the Hungarian fascist Crusade Arrow Party, as Hungary's new leader. Because of the success of these operations, Skorzeny was selected to lead the famous Operation Greif, the last major German offensive on the Western Front. Carried out during the Battle of the Bulge, Operation Greif was designed to create confusion and disorganization in the Allied lines by infiltrating German troops disguised as American soldiers. The goal was to sow chaos, disrupt Allied communications, and facilitate the advance of German forces. While the German soldiers managed to cause some confusion, sabotaging the equipment of the Allied forces and interfering with their communication, they were eventually discovered, which naturally mitigated the impact of the operation. This, however, earned Skorzeny the title of the most dangerous man in Europe. After the fall of the Third Reich and the end of World War II, Skorzeny was captured by Allied forces. However, he was released in 1948 due to a lack of evidence against him. He then moved to Spain under Franco's protection and settled in Madrid, where he lived peacefully in a well-to-do house in the El Viso neighborhood, working in the field of private security and advice, being particularly appreciated for his experience in special operations during the war. From there, he participated in the formation of Spanish ratlines, in particular, and European ratlines in general. Many believe, in fact, that Skorzeny was the main leader of Odessa. In the 1950s, he was a fervent supporter of the creation of an anti-communist military corps in Spain, made up of former National Socialist Germans who had taken refuge under the Franco dictatorship. He was supported and backed diplomatically by a former German chaplain of the Condor Legion and a volunteer of the Blue Division nicknamed Father Conrado. His memoirs, published in 2 volumes, became a bestseller worldwide. He married Ilse Luthier, niece of Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's finance minister. He is said to have been a bodyguard for Eva Peron, an advisor to Gamal Abdel Nasser, and that Mossad agents contacted him to help them identify German scientists apparently working on the development of Egypt's military program. During his last years, Skorzeny lived in the town of Alcudia in the Balearic Islands. A heavy smoker, he died of lung cancer on July 7, 1975, at the age of 67, convinced of the value of National Socialism until his last breath. The Last Refuge, Léon Degrelle and his life in François. Born into a Catholic family of French origin on June 15, 1906 in Bouillon, Belgium, Léon Degrelle studied in Brussels and Geneva and became involved in politics early on through journalism. In the early 1930s, he joined Catholic Action and began working for a small Catholic publishing house called Christus Rex, which published a newspaper of the same name. He traveled to Mexico as a correspondent to cover the Cristero War that was being waged between the National League for the Defense of Religious Freedom and the Mexican government, which, according to the Constitution of 1917, had imposed restrictions on Catholic worship and prohibitions on the clergy. The Cristero rallying cry Long live Christ the King and Holy Mary of Guadalupe. Deeply impressed Degel, and after returning to Belgium in 1934, he founded Les Éditions de Rex and began to mobilize in the Belgian Catholic Party, promoting a more militant and radical course of action. In the early 1930s, deeply disappointed by what he saw as the corruption of existing parties, including the Catholic Party of Belgium, backed by the church hierarchy, he took control of the publishing house, which under his leadership became the Rexist Party, ran for election in 1936, and won 11% of the vote. The following year, he improved his performance, obtaining 19% of the votes, but support declined in the following years, and in April 1939, with World War II already in the making, the legislative elections yielded only 4.43% of the votes. Degel met in August 1936 with Mussolini and the following month with Hitler, from whom he obtained funding for the party and began to incorporate into his platform anti-Semitic principles similar to those promoted by the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany. He later met with other leaders of the European far right, including Corneliu Codreanu, leader of the Romanian Iron Guard, and José Antonio Primo de Rivera, founder of the Spanish Falange. Degel began collaborating with Nazi Germany at the beginning of the war and was arrested by the Belgian authorities. Following the German invasion of Belgium in the mid-1940s, Degel was released and began to turn Rex into a mass movement to curry favor with the Nazis. In June 1941, a few days before the German invasion of the Soviet Union, he established an alliance with the Flemish nationalists. Degel believed that the unification of the European far right into a common front against the USSR would give him the opportunity to strengthen ties of collaboration. That same month, Degel founded the Walloon Legion, a contingent of Belgian volunteers forged to fight the Soviets alongside the Wehrmacht, similar to the Blue Division. In 1943, the Legion became an assault brigade attached to the Waffen-SS. Degel's performance at the Battle of Korsun-Cherkasy the following year and his subsequent decorations, including the Iron Cross, made him a model for foreign collaborators. In the spring of 1945, when German defeat was evident, Himmler appointed Degel SS Brigadeführer, although the appointment never took effect, as Himmler had been stripped of his responsibilities and Degel had left the front to flee for Copenhagen. When German forces in Norway capitulated to Allied forces, Degel escaped to Spain in the plane of Minister Albert Speer. But after breaking through enemy lines, his plane ran out of fuel and had to make an emergency landing in the Bay of San Sebastian in the north of the country. After rescuing him, the Franco regime granted him political asylum. The surrender of Degel, along with that of Pierre Laval, the head of the French militia and main collaborator of the Gestapo in Vichy, France, also a refugee in Spanish territory after the fall of the Axis, was demanded by the Allies in view of the neutrality that Spain had maintained during the war. Although Franco handed over Laval, the delicate condition of Degel, seriously injured in his forced landing, allowed him to temporarily excuse himself from doing so with him. During the year of hospitalization, Degel began writing his book about his experience on the Eastern Front. He was tried in Belgium in absentia, and in December 1945 his Belgian nationality was withdrawn, and he was sentenced to death for collaboration with the German invaders. In August of the following year, Franco pretended to give in to international pressure for his surrender, but allowed him to flee and instead handed over a socias, whose identity was quickly discovered. José Finat y Escrivá de Romaní, a former Spanish ambassador to Nazi Germany and a collaborator with the Gestapo, and Hans Josef Hoffmann, who had served as a translator in the Blue Division and apparently acted as an interpreter between Agustín Muñoz Grandes, commander of the division, and Hitler himself, provided money, false documents, and support for Degel to go into hiding. Finally, Degel was welcomed at the Extremaduran estate of the pro-Nazi phalangist Eduardo Esca. Belgium unsuccessfully demanded Degel's extradition for 15 years. In 1954, in order to disguise his identity and perpetuate his stay in Spain, Degel received Spanish nationality, thanks to the intervention of the Count of Valleellano and his protector José San Millán, who provided him with the documentation, adopting the name of José León Ramírez Reina. In Spain, Degel maintained contacts with far-right groups and remained an influential figure in fascist circles. Although he did not hold official positions in the Franco regime, he was allowed to live comfortably and participate in events and meetings of supporters of fascism and Nazism, as well as write several books and articles in which he defended his role during the war and his fascist ideology. Through his writings and interviews, Degel continued to promote his political vision and deny the crimes of Nazism, which earned him international criticism, but also the support of certain radical sectors. Finally, Degel died on March 31, 1994 in Torremolinos on the Spanish Costa del Sol at the age of 87. The man who put down the attack, Otto Rehder and his exile in Spain. Another Nazi officer who found refuge in Spain was Otto Rehder. Unlike Skorzeny and Degel, Rehder was born into a family of craftsmen on August 18, 1912. He joined the German army and served in various campaigns during World War II. In February 1943, he commanded the 1st Mechanized Battalion of the Grossdeutschland Grenadier Regiment. His half-track troops covered the retreat of a Waffen-SS tank corps during the 4th Battle of Kharkiv. He was awarded the Knight's Cross for his services as a battalion commander, and in November 1943, he received the Oak Leaves for his leadership at Krivoy Rog. However, Rehder is remembered primarily for his role in the July 20, 1944 bombing. Towards the end of World War II, discontent with the Nazi regime grew among some sectors of the German army and the internal resistance. The war was becoming increasingly unfavorable to Germany, and many within the country began to question the efficacy of the conflict and Hitler's policy. A group of conspirators led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, General Erwin von Witzleben and General Henning von Tresckow, motivated by the desire to end the war, the rejection of the totalitarian regime and concern for the fate of Germany, attempted a coup d'état. The plot, which took the name Valkyrie Plan after Wagner's opera, and was actually a modified version of Operation Valkyrie, an emergency plan drawn up by the Wehrmacht in 1941, aimed at protecting continuity of power in the face of a civil or military insurrection. It consisted of assassinating Hitler and taking control to negotiate an armistice with the Allies. Von Stauffenberg, who had lost his left eye, his right hand, and 2 fingers of his left hand in the campaign to North Africa, hid a bomb in Hitler's headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, which was to explode during a meeting Hitler was to hold with some of his officers. The bomb, however, was displaced from its original position and ended up exploding in one of the corridors of the barracks. The explosion, while devastating, did not kill Hitler, who survived with only minor injuries. The coup, moreover, did not receive support from the civilian population or the vast majority of the military. Immediately after the explosion, Nazi authorities arrested numerous suspects and their supporters. The repression was brutal. Thousands of people were imprisoned and even executed, and the Nazi regime tightened control over the country. At the time, Rehder was in command of the Third Reich Guard unit, which was responsible for protecting the centers of power in Berlin. His position gave him significant influence on government security and reaction to key events such as this. Rehder received orders from the Ministry of the Interior, which was under the control of Heinrich Himmler, to take action against the conspirators. He was mobilized to quell the resistance of Stauffenberg's group and ensure that the coup did not succeed. Once the coup was put down, Rehder was promoted and rewarded for his loyalty to the regime. Rehder commanded in East Prussia and, with little success, a field unit made up of men from the Grossdeutschland. However, the unit suffered too many casualties and was moved west to take part in the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The following year he was promoted to general, but his military skills were called into question when he decided to move to Silesia, where he was finally captured by the American army and held prisoner of war until 1947. After being released, he became an active figure in German politics. He founded the Socialist Reich Party in 1950, which was outlawed 2 years later by the courts of the Federal Republic of Germany. His life after the war was thus marked by the promotion of extremist ideologies and the denial of the crimes of the Nazi regime. During his later years, Rehder devoted himself to promoting revisionist theories about World War II, questioning the veracity of the Holocaust and the role of the Nazis in the conflict. The German justice sentenced him in October 1992 to 22 months in prison for publishing several articles in which he denied the existence of the Holocaust. However, Rehder managed to flee to Spain in 1944. The Spanish Ministry of Justice rejected his refugee status and denied him asylum, so Rehder was forced to flee to Egypt and then Syria, being a fugitive from German justice until his death in 1997, at the age of 85, in the resort town of Marbella, in southern Spain. Although the German government requested his extradition, the Spanish National Court ruled against the request since Spanish law did not admit the crime of genocide denial. According to her, Rehder, one of the most effective and fearsome repressors of the Third Reich, had definitely committed no crime. A Nazi pilot flying over Latin America. The dark story of HansUlrich Rudell. HansUlrich Rudell was born on July 2, 1916, in Konradswaldau, Prussia. He joined the Hitler Youth in 1933 and participated in the Reich Labor Service. He then joined the Luftwaffe and began his military career as an aerial reconnaissance pilot. Rudell spent much of the war on the Eastern Front, where his skill and tenacity in combat earned him the respect of both his allies and his enemies. He participated in the defense of Stalingrad and the final offensive in the East. He became the most decorated fighter pilot in the Third Reich, holder until his death of the highest German decoration of his time, the Iron Cross with oak leaves in gold, swords and diamonds. In May 1945, the war was finally coming to an end, and Rudell fled west from an airfield near Prague, landed in Allied territory, and surrendered to American forces. He was released in 1946 and emigrated 2 years later to Argentina via the Vatican route, traveling through the Austrian Zillertal Valley to Italy. In Rome, with the help of South Tyrolean smugglers and Austrian Bishop Alois Hudal, he bought a fake Red Cross passport in the name of Emilio Mayer and took a flight from Rome to Buenos Aires, where he arrived in June 1948. While there, he founded the Kameradenwerk, an aid organization for Nazi war criminals. Among its prominent members was SS officer Ludwig Linhart, whose extradition in Sweden had been demanded by the Soviet Union on war crimes charges. The group maintained close contact with other internationally wanted fascists such as Ante Pavelic, Carlo Scorza, and Konstantin von Neurath. In addition, the Kameradenwerk also assisted Nazi criminals imprisoned in Europe, such as Rudolf Hess and Karl Dönitz, sending them food parcels and remunerating their legal fees. In Argentina, Rudell also became acquainted with Josef Mengele, a former doctor of the concentration and extermination camps and a Nazi war criminal. Along with Wilhelm Sassen, a former Waffen-SS officer, Wehrmacht war correspondent who initially worked as its driver, Rudell helped relocate Mengele to Brazil by introducing him to Nazi supporter Wolfgang Gerhard. Rudell lived in Villa Carlos Paz, about 36 kilometers from the city of Córdoba, where he rented a house and operated a brick factory. There he wrote his war memoirs, published in 1949 by Dürer Verlag, a publishing house created by Wilfried von Oven, Goebbels' former personal press assistant, and which was responsible for editing books written by National Socialist leaders that were often forbidden to be published in Germany. He was also active as a military advisor and arms dealer for Augusto Pinochet in Chile and Alfredo Stroessner in Paraguay. In 1955, after the Liberating Revolution, a military uprising that ended Juan Domingo Perón's second presidential term, he was forced to leave Argentina and move to Paraguay. In the following years, he acted many times as a foreign representative for several German companies, such as Salzgitter AG, Dornier Flugzeugwerke, Focke-Wulf, Messerschmitt, Siemens AG and Lohmeyer International. In the 1960s, German intelligence, under the covert company Merex, was in close contact with former members of the SS and NSDAP. Merex, aided by contacts established by Rudell, sold discarded Bundeswehr equipment to several dictators in Latin America. Rudell helped establish contact between Merex and Friedrich Schwend, a former member of the Third Reich's Central Security Office who had close ties to the military services of Peru and Bolivia. Rudell and Schwend founded a company called La Estrella, which employed several former SS officers who had fled to Latin America. Through it, Rudell also came into contact with Skorzeny, who had his own network of former SS and Wehrmacht officers. In the midst of all these operations, Rudell returned to Germany in 1953 and became a leading member of the Party of the German Empire, which included many of the former members of the Socialist Reich Party founded by Rehmer and dissolved by the Federal Constitutional Court of Germany only a year earlier. Rudell died after suffering a stroke at Rosenheim on December 18, 1982, and was buried at Dornhausen on December 22. During the burial ceremony, 2 Bundeswehr F-4 Phantoms soared through the sky at low altitude. Dornhausen was situated in the middle of an air route on which military aircraft regularly flew, and Bundeswehr officials deliberately denied the use of such aircraft for the funeral. Federal Defense Minister Manfred Wörner stated that it was simply a routine training exercise. 4 people were photographed giving the Nazi salute. Latin America, sanctuary for fugitives, the flight of Nazi criminals, and Perón's exile in Spain. Latin America was one of the main destinations chosen by Nazi war criminals and collaborators of the Third Reich once World War II ended due to strategic, political, and social reasons that made this region the ideal place to flee. Several Latin American countries showed sympathy or at least an ambivalent attitude towards Nazism or Italian fascism. This naturally facilitated the reception of the fugitives. During the war, moreover, many Latin American countries maintained a neutral position or were slow to break diplomatic relations with the Axis powers, which allowed some networks of support for the Nazis to be already in operation before the conflict ended. On the other hand, many Latin American countries had weak institutions and judicial systems that were not prepared to handle the extradition or prosecution of war criminals. This made the Nazis see in these countries a safe haven where they could live without fear of being handed over to international authorities. By the end of the war, the attention of the Allied powers was focused on the reconstruction of Europe and the containment of the Soviet Union, which allowed many Nazis to escape without much opposition. Latin America was far from the geopolitical spotlight, allowing the fugitives to live relatively peacefully. Likewise, there were German communities in Latin America established since the 19th century, which facilitated the integration of fugitives. These communities often offered logistical and economic support to the new arrivals. The continent was also in the midst of a process of economic and social transformation. This context offered Nazi fugitives opportunities to rebuild their lives, both in politics and in business. Many of them became involved in industry, commerce, and, in some cases, military advice and arms sales to authoritarian regimes. In short, Latin America was seen by the Nazis as an ideal refuge due to a combination of political sympathies, effective escape networks, economic opportunities, and the institutional weakness of many countries in the region. These factors, coupled with geographical distance and reduced international attention, allowed many war criminals such as Josef Mengele, Ronald Richter, Franz Stangl, and Adolf Eichmann to escape justice and start new lives on the continent. Argentina is usually, on the other hand, the country most associated with Nazism, mainly due to the figure of Juan Domingo Perón. After being overthrown by the military coup of 1955, Perón, who had visited Europe in the formative years of totalitarian regimes and had even served in the Italian army, moved to Paraguay, under the protection of dictator Alfredo Stroessner, then to Panama, Venezuela, and the Dominican Republic. Finally, Perón decided to settle in Spain, which was still dominated by the Franco regime. The former Argentine president settled in Madrid, where he lived in a villa in Puerta de Hierro, an affluent area of the city. This residence became a meeting place for many Peronist exiles, and from there Perón continued to influence Argentine politics. Franco, who led an authoritarian regime, saw in Perón a natural ally because of his own inclinations toward corporatism and nationalism, and decided to provide him with political asylum, as well as protection and certain privileges. Perón's house in Madrid became a center of political operations. From there, he organized meetings, maintained contact with union and political leaders in Argentina, and advised on the political strategy of Peronism in his native country. Through letters, radio messages, and visits from emissaries, Perón remained a central figure in Argentine politics, fostering the Peronist movement and preparing for its eventual return. During his stay in Spain, the former president was accompanied by Maria Estela Martinez, better known as Isabel, whom he met in Panama and married in 1961. Isabel was his third wife and would play an important role in Argentine politics after Perón's return to the country in 1973. Perón organized his life in Spain by agreeing to deal with those who showed him the most ideological affinity, the historical Francoists and the Phalangists, who shared his criticisms of US imperialism. Surrounded by the popularity that the shipment of cereals to Spain had generated during his mandate, and by the international support obtained in those years, Perón frequented some circles of journalists close to Phalangism, or of military imbued with the slogans that led to the uprising in July of 1936. This was useful for him to achieve his most immediate purposes. Some say that Franco received Perón on several occasions at the Palacio del Pardo, the official residence of the Spanish dictator, to discuss issues of international politics, the situation in Latin America, and the role of Peronism in Argentine politics. However, there are no official records or documents that categorically confirm a meeting between the two. It is possible that their communication was through intermediaries or correspondence rather than direct encounters. Echoes of the Third Reich. Conclusions about the influence of Nazism in Spain. In conclusion, the influence of Nazism in Spain during and after the Second World War reveals a complex network of relationships and strategies that shaped both Spanish politics and society in a critical period. The initial sympathy for the Third Reich and collaboration in various forms reflect the ideological alignment of the Franco dictatorship with fascist principles, although political distance and the evolution of the war led to a more pragmatic relationship with the Nazi regime. Prominent figures of Nazism, such as Otto Schnein or Otto Rehder, found in Spain a refuge that allowed them to avoid international justice and continue their activities. The asylum policy and the connections with certain sectors of the Franco regime facilitated the arrival of these individuals, creating a network that not only protected the war criminals, but also allowed the influence of their ideologies at the local level. The legacy of these connections, though often relegated to the margins of official history, remains a crucial topic of study for understanding the scope and implications of international collaboration in the context of fascism and World War II. The most significant example of collaboration between Spain and the Nazi regime was the participation of the Blue Division on the Eastern Front. This unity not only symbolizes the ideological alliance between Francoism and the Third Reich, but also the degree of commitment that Spain had in the conflict. Although Franco maintained a position of official neutrality, the Blue Division represented a clear support for German war efforts, and its actions on the Eastern Front left a mark on the historical memory of both countries. Spain's involvement in the war, while limited compared to that of other Axis allies, underscores the complex relationship between fascist ideologies and political pragmatism during the conflict. However, the end of World War II did not put an end to the influence of Nazism in Spain. Ratlines were crucial to the escape of numerous Nazi war criminals. The Catholic Church, through its support networks and with the complicity of some clerics, facilitated these escape routes, providing false documentation and logistical assistance. The ratlines not only demonstrate Spain's ambiguous post-war stance, but also the role of foreign institutions in protecting war criminals. The presence of Nazis in Spain and their eventual transfer to Latin America reveal a lesser-known facet of the post-war period in which political interests and ideology played a crucial role in protecting fugitives. The fact that some of the most notorious war criminals, such as Josef Mengele and Adolf Eichmann, have found refuge in the Americas through these routes underscores the scope and effectiveness of these operations. The impact of these decisions and actions was felt throughout the second half of the 20th century. The presence of Nazis in Latin America and the collaboration of some countries in the protection of these fugitives contributed to a network of influence that had repercussions on regional politics and international relations. The influence of these fugitives in South America also reflects how the legacy of Nazism spread beyond Europe, shaping political and social dynamics in various regions of the world. In short, the relationship between Spain and Nazism is a testament to how extreme ideologies can cross borders and how political decisions can have lasting ramifications. The participation of the Blue Division, the facilitation of the ratlines, and the impact on Latin American politics demonstrate the complexity of the interaction between Francoism and the Third Reich. They are, in short, a testimony to the indissoluble relationship that Spain established with the worst dictatorship of the 20th century.